All right, let's talk a little bit about Dr. Pisano. You don't mind if I call you Etta during the course of this, okay? She is the first woman to be named the Dean of the College of Medicine at the Medical University. For those of you who aren't privy to the culture over there, this is a big deal. This is a huge deal because that's the top of the food chain. She also serves as the Vice President for Medical Affairs. Is that correct?
Correct.
So before we leap into this, and also you need to know that Etta is a major player in the international world when it comes to breast imaging. And that may not sound very exciting, but when we get to it, you're going to be thrilled to hear what she has been doing with her time and her research. It's going to benefit all of us. So let's start at the beginning. You know you're in the South, so we have to say, where were you born?
I was born in New York City.
And where did you grow up?
So I grew up outside of Philadelphia, a little town, a suburb of Philadelphia.
Which one?
Flowertown.
Okay.
Right outside of Chestnut Hill.
Tell us a little bit about your parents.
So my father was a radiologist, and he was sort of an entrepreneur. He worked in private practice, but then in his 40s he decided he wanted to start his own company and his own business. And so he was the first radiologist who invested in outpatient imaging in the 70s, way before anybody else was doing it. So he built a huge practice over the course of about a 30-year period and retired. Sold his practice to Penn when he retired, so he was very successful entrepreneur. And my mother was a homemaker who had been an electrical engineer.
Tell that story.
Yeah, so she was an electrical engineer who went to, right out of college. The way it worked, she got a job with the phone company, helping. This was back in the 50s before she married, and she was managing. They were computerizing. It was the early days of computers, mainframes, really big mainframes, and they were computerizing the phone system. And she was over an office full of men, actually, right out of, within a few years of being graduated from college. And when she got married, they let her go because they said they didn't hire married women. So that was in 1955. So she ended up raising 7 children.
I was going to go there next. So she still managed, is what she did.
She had a lot of management.
Where are you in the birth order?
So I'm the oldest of the 7.
Of course you are. Of course you are. Absolutely no question. I don't even know. Did you get into trouble much as a kid?
Not exactly.
No, Did you get into trouble and got away with it when you were a kid?
I would never characterize myself as a troublemaker as a kid. I was the oldest who helped the mother, manage the 6 other kids.
Right.
I was not a troublemaker. People are always asking my friends who knew me in that early days of my life to tell them good stories, and there aren't any good stories. I mean, genuinely, there really aren't. I also went to all-girls school, which I know you all can relate to. It's hard to get in a lot of trouble in an all-girls school.
Well, you've got a good point there. How would you describe yourself as a child?
I really was just, I feel like I was the person who my parents turned to help them manage the huge amount of work there was in our household. I mean, I was, my mother died when I was 15, and my father just, I was in charge after that point, and I was ready for it. I mean, I knew, I'd already been such a competent, I was the one they turned to, there were lots of times when you have 7 children where you needed someone to help you besides, you can't do it by yourself. Right. And that was sort of the day and age when there wasn't a lot, people didn't think to hire help. I mean, my parents did a little, but it was a few hours a week. So I was really, mother's helper is the way I would frame my role in the family.
And did another sibling step in when you went off to college?
Yeah, well, it wouldn't be fair to say I did it all. My sis, I'm the way that, and I always say this, there were 5 girls and 2 boys, and thank goodness it wasn't the other way around, just to be clear. Right. I mean, because, the 4 oldest were girls, and so and we were very closely spaced. So I was 12 months older than my sister, and then she was 12 months older than my next sister, and she was 23 months older than the next sister. So the 4 girls were the oldest. I mean, and then there was, the baby was also a girl. So I would say, all of us had to pitch in when my mother died, and, I had my role. I was sort of the organizer. And, I was the driver. I was the only, when my mother died, I wasn't quite 16. And it was like, oh, she had been the driver, and so I had to learn how to drive, and then I started driving. I was like, so it's hard to believe now, given I have as someone who's raised teenagers, that my father said, why don't you drive everyone everywhere? When I just barely learned how to drive, and I was driving everyone everywhere. So I was kind of the organizer driver, and then my sister B, who's a year younger than me, she was the cook, and my sister Louise, who was 2 years younger than me, was the laundress. We just did all the work. I mean, and top of school and everything else.
What did you learn from that whole thing that you still carry with you, that you use in your arsenal?
Well, I think it's hard to get into a worse situation than that. I feel like, I can do. I really taught me that I could do pretty much anything. It's hard to imagine a worse situation for a family.
At that time, or before your mother died, what did you think you were going to be when you got older?
I had decided when I was 12 I was going to be an MD.
Can you confirm that, Jan?
Well, he wasn't there. But
No, he's heard the stories. Maybe he's heard the stories.
No. I just had decided I was going to be a doctor. I'm not exactly sure how I came to that decision, but I had decided well before my mother's death that I was going to be a doctor.
And you went through and did it.
Yeah. Right.
But let's talk about school for a little bit. All right, you went elementary school. You went to school.
All girls, private Catholic school.
With the nuns?
Yes, with the nuns. In fact, the only time I had, for 2 years I went to a co-ed school from 7th and 8th grade. And that was just because we had moved and my parents didn't like to take us so far to the school we'd been, which was an all-girls private Catholic school. So they put me and all my siblings into a co-ed school. And so anyway, I spent 2 years at that school, but then I went right back to an all-girls private Catholic school for the high school.
What kind of student were you?
I was a good student.
I'm going to dig. I'm going to find something. I promise me.
I always know. I honestly, there are no good stories from my childhood about me misbehaving. I just don't have any.
Etta, what did you do? What did you do for fun?
Let's see. I actually loved sports. My husband's going to laugh at that since I don't do that anymore. But I actually coached a softball team when I was in high school. I coached a middle school softball team, and I loved doing that. We had horses, and so I rode for fun. We swam. We did outdoorsy things. I read a lot. I really was boring as can be. I really was.
I think you possibly get a little more exciting the older you get. We're going to find
something when I went
here.
To college, I managed to have a little more fun, but really.
Are you still friends with anyone from that time in your life? I mean, have you maintained those early childhood friendships?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I do have a lot of friends from my childhood still. The oldest friend, of course, my sisters. I keep up with my sisters, and they're all, they've known me since they were born. But my oldest friend that I still talk to regularly, I met in nursery school. So she and I are still friends after.
And how would she describe you if we called her and said, what was Etta like in grade school?
I don't know what she would say, but she's known me for so long. I think when we talk, it's so interesting. I know that she's told me that I have very strong values, and when she wants advice, she'll call me, and because she feels like she keeps in touch with her own parents by talking to me, because we grew up together, essentially. We went all through kindergarten, all through elementary, all through high school together. And the most amazing thing about her is that she's in exactly the same field I am, which if you had told, she's a breast imaging radiologist. And so the odds of that are so small. But I knew she was going to be a doctor too early on, but we went down the same path. But, she calls me and we talk we give each other advice about our children. And she's told me that when she talks to me, she feels like she's talking to her parents because she knows that I share the values of her parents. And her parents but one of them's dead now and the other one's demented. So I channel her parents for the values that we grew up with. That doesn't feel very like naughty either, I wish she would not
naughty. Yeah. But I do want to make a point here because we have two high school seniors here. Have both of you been in school together for the whole time? For the 12 years?
She was 12th day, so.
That's okay, it's a good school, I went there. But you have friends that you started with in the first grade. And I think the message that we want to send is stay in touch with those friends. It's really important. I've had the same situation. You need to have people who knew you as a child, who remember you as a child.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. Was there a teacher or more than one teacher that had a particularly strong influence on you during those school years?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Many, many teachers. So the nuns, as a group, there were just incredibly strong women. It's kind of interesting because when I was growing up with them, I thought this is really strange. They don't have spouses. They don't have they're celibate. All those things about being a nun, but in some sense they are very independent. They sort of transmitted a value system. And I would just say that was very important to my worldview. They're very dedicated to what they do. They care deeply about the people they're teaching. And I just have great admiration for most of them. Of course, there are the horror stories, people who are abusive and that sort of thing, but that was pretty rare. I had lots of teachers. I had a math teacher who really, she told me, you're good at this, you should keep doing this. And just many, many teachers. I had a Spanish teacher who I had for homeroom also my whole high school career, who I got very close to and talked to every day. These are I feel very blessed that I had such great teachers through my high school and elementary and all the way through.
How did you decide where to go to college?
I knew I wanted to go far away from Philadelphia. I knew that if I stayed in Philadelphia, I would end up in that same role with my family, that it would be hard for me to extricate myself from this caretaker role. And I knew I had to leave in order to get out of that. And so I made a decision I was not going to stay in Philadelphia. And so I applied to, I decided also I wanted to go someplace where my father would let me go, which he told me there were only two places I couldn't go. And that was because they were too radical. You may remember that period of our this was during the 70s.
Where couldn't you go?
So I wasn't allowed to go to the University of Chicago or Berkeley. Because both of those were sort of radical schools. My father's a conservative Republican, so it was really not a good idea for me to go to either one of those places.
You ready for what they told me? I couldn't go north of the Mason-Dixon line. And my mother was born in the north.
Huh.
Honestly. So you didn't go to Berkeley.
I couldn't go to Berkeley or Chicago, but he was open about anywhere else. But I knew that he would have a hard time me going to a city, and he would think it might be dangerous. So I chose places that were in the country to go. And I was, I thought I had this romantic idea I would learn how to ski and do things out in the woods and things like that. And I hadn't done it up till then, so why would I think I was going to do it after that? But because my family just wasn't into that. But so I went to Dartmouth out of college. For college, and but the places I applied were all places like Dartmouth that were sort of rural. Kind of. I thought my father would find them acceptably safe for a young woman. Afterwards, I didn't have the heart to tell him the most dangerous thing on a college campus is your classmates. But, he thought it was safe there. It is safe, what I'm saying. But
what did you major in?
I was a philosophy major
Okay.
at Dartmouth. And in fact, that was a very influential person in my life, too, my thesis advisor. I really got to know him well, and we were lifelong friends. He just died last year, so.
And you met someone at Dartmouth?
Yeah, my husband, who's in the crowd over there. We met.
Jan is here?
Yeah.
Shoring up Jason. So I find it interesting. So you met in college.
Right.
And how did that
So
transpire?
I had a boyfriend before Jan at Dartmouth, and he wanted me to be sort of a traditional woman. He would tell me things like, I don't know if anybody remembers this book, A Total Woman. Do you remember that book?
Maribel Morgan? Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so those of you who don't know,
not
should
write that
Google
down,
it.
Alex. Do not want to read that
He thought that was the model of how to be a woman, which clearly wasn't my idea of what a woman
Right.
should be. And so I remember him telling me that he thought that book was, this is my older boyfriend, so that was history very shortly thereafter. And, but I remember, so I was looking for a man who would want to be my partner in both marriage and having children, and also in supporting careers. And I remember, it might embarrass him for me to tell this story, but I'll tell it anyway. We were standing in line. It was one of our first dates. We were standing in line waiting for a piano concert that he had invited me to, and we were standing in line, and there was a woman we both knew, standing up in front of the line. And she was a physics major, and we both knew her. And he pointed to her and he said, "Do you know her?" And I said, "Yeah, I know her." And he said, "She's going places." And I was so impressed with that, and what he meant, he didn't mean
Yeah.
she's getting married, having babies. He meant she's going to be successful in her life, other than that, of course. And so I was very impressed with that. I remember being very impressed with him because he said that. And I thought, well, this is the kind of man I need to find for myself.
It's a very important point. It's a very important
someone who's
point.
going to support you
Exactly.
completely and will admire your successes instead of feeling competitive or feeling like you have to support him only.
So when did you get married?
We married halfway through medical school, so we applied to. He was a genius. He got into Duke Medical School a lot faster than I did. He got in after his junior year, and he almost left, but our relationship was starting, and he decided to stay for his senior year because he wanted to give our relationship a chance. And so it took me till April, almost the end of April of my senior year of college, to get accepted to medical school at Duke. I'd been in other medical schools, but I hadn't gotten into Duke, and that's where he was going to go. So. Luckily I got into Duke and we got married halfway through medical school, so.
Wow. And kids?
Yeah, we have 4 children. Our oldest was born when we were residents in Boston at Harvard Teaching Hospitals, and then the others were born after we joined the faculty at UNC Chapel Hill.
As you can tell, prestigious schools all the way around: Dartmouth, Duke, Harvard, and 4 kids while you're doing all of this. So we're going to get into that, I think, a little bit. But I do want to ask you this. How did you address the whole work-life balance thing during those years, particularly when you started having kids? I mean, did you make any major adjustments? I mean, you're in school, you can't really not go to classes.
Yeah, well, so we were already residents, which is a little different than being students. I actually think it's easier as a student than as a resident, though, because as a student, you're paying them to educate you, so if they need to give you a time off, you'll get time off. Whereas once you're a resident, you're their employee, and that they can tell you have to show up after only 6 weeks off, or if you want to keep your job. But we can go back to that because I have a lot of stories about that. But I'll just say, my advice to young women when they have children and in a career that matters to them is they better have a partner who wants to split the work. It's a lot of work having children. What we did mainly is we found an absolutely wonderful woman to help us take care of our first child, and that was true throughout the time we had children. We always had good people helping us, and we both were deeply committed to our children and to help them, develop themselves. So, it was. I would say it's just thinking about it and figuring it out, but with your partner. I don't think it's not a great mystery. Women have been doing it for millennia. It's just, it's been sort of mystified recently. Like we had this brief period in the 50s where women were supposed to just do that. Other than that, throughout history, we've had plenty of women doing everything, including, think about it, the pioneers going out to the West with,
But the medical culture, particularly you were in an academic environment after you finished your residency, right? That's when you went to UNC Chapel Hill, correct?
Right.
And what position did you take there?
So I was appointed the chief of breast imaging. I was a founding director of the chief of breast imaging at UNC.
How did you decide on breast imaging as your focus for your career?
So I was pretty tired when I finished my residency. I was worn out, to be honest. I was a little on the burned out side, and I decided, and I had a small child, and we had been working so hard. I had to take my boards, all that kind of stuff. It was a lot of work, and Jan was working hard too. And I decided I was going to work part-time for a while, and I took a job at the place, Beth Israel, where I had trained, and the woman who had been in charge of breast imaging at Beth Israel decided to get married just as I was about to graduate, and it was almost fortuitous. What happened next was the chair of the department went round and asked everyone to step in and be the chief of breast imaging, and everyone more senior to me said, no way. This is really a true story. And finally he got to me, and I think he learned that he couldn't ask, he had to tell. So at that point, I was just graduating. He said, you will be the chief of breast imaging here. And then he added, this will be your future. This will be good for you. I promise you. And so I became the chief of breast imaging. And I was only working part-time, but the interesting thing was there was a more senior guy who ended up being a mentor of mine, really, had been a mentor up to then, but he really became my mentor after this. He should have been the chief of breast imaging, but he hated administration. And he said to me, "Oh, don't worry, I'll help you." And that was how I became, I got mentored for that year in learning how to be the chief of breast imaging. And what was nice is when I was applying for jobs a year later, Jan and I wanted to leave Boston. When I was applying, I was the chief of breast imaging at a Harvard teaching hospital. So it was like, people thought, wow, she must be really good. She's doing this at age 29 or something.
Other than your siblings, though, this was your first time to really manage other people?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. Well, although I was the chief resident, too. I had been the chief resident. So you have to manage the residents when you're the chief resident, and do their schedules and that kind of stuff. So I had that experience as well. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the whole issue of gender bias in your earlier years before you got to UNC. I'm sure you've got some stories around that.
I have so many stories. We could spend all night on that. but I don't want to depress everyone. But I'll give you one story. When I got pregnant with my oldest child, I went to see the the residency director, and he told me there was no maternity leave. They didn't have maternity leave. And by the way, why didn't I take a year off and maybe consider not coming back? Because, a woman who has a baby is just not going to be as dedicated to her work. And this happened not that long ago. This was in 1985. So everybody who thinks it was in the dark old days, it wasn't that long ago. And so I was sort of incredulous that they didn't have paid maternity leave. I went to see the business manager for the department, and he said, "No, he's right, we don't have paid maternity leave." So then I realized my real employer was the hospital, not the department. And so I went to the HR department of the hospital, and they said, "Of course we have paid maternity leave." It was so interesting. And so what was interesting, so they had 8 weeks of paid maternity leave for all the residents in the whole place, but no one had ever gone down there and asked them. So the department had kept everyone from getting paid maternity leave for all these years. I mean, there have been women residents. And in fact, when I first arrived, there was a woman resident who was out on maternity leave. And so I found out there was paid maternity leave. So they gave me paid maternity leave, and then they gave back pay to all the women that hadn't given paid maternity leave. I still run into this woman at meetings, because she's a radiologist, of course, and she always tells the story about how I got her paid maternity leave retroactively. So there's just one example. I mean, I had tons of them. I could go on and on and on. I mean, it was a difficult period. That was at Harvard Medical School at Beth Israel Hospital, yes.
1985.
1985.
All right, let's get you to UNC.
Okay.
All right. A few more babies.
Right, 3 babies left after that.
Okay.
Right.
So by the time you got to UNC, you'd had your family, or you finished?
No. We started, we had our,
Okay.
I got really popular because I showed up 7 months pregnant with my second child. And that was, they weren't very happy with me. I did negotiate part-time tenure track position, which that's an interesting story too. And I always tell the story because it's an instructive about how you have to really stick to your guns when you're negotiating. You can't back down. So let me give you this story. I got hired. The only thing I negotiated, because it was really important to me, was to be part-time, because I had a child and one more on the way, and Jan was working full-time, and I wanted to be on the tenure track because I thought that would be a way that I would be able to be given time to be academically productive. Okay, so I wouldn't be given time if I wasn't on that was just the way the place was structured. And so I negotiated that and a salary, and Jan started his job July 1st. I was going to start August 1st, and about July 15th, the boss calls me and says, "Well, the dean won't let us hire you part-time tenure track. You can either be part-time fixed-term track, or you can be full-time tenure track, but you can't be both." So this is 2 weeks before I'm supposed to start my job. So I said to him, "Well, I'm not coming then, because it's the only thing I asked you for. And if I can't trust you, I'm not working for you." And I think it honestly shocked him, because he didn't expect that answer. But I know now, looking back at my career, that if I had gone full-time, it would have been too much for my family at that moment in time. And if I had gone off the tenure track, I wouldn't have been given the time to do the things I did. So it was a hugely important conversation, and he had promised it to me. So, and 2 hours later, he called me back and said, "The dean has agreed to what you've asked for."
Wow.
That was a very important.
You're absolutely right. That's a very important negotiation. Talk a little bit about the the massive study that you conducted when you were at UNC. And this is the thing I want everybody to pay attention to, because this is truly groundbreaking. What prompted you to do it, and what were you looking for?
So my whole academic focus has been on improving the detection of breast cancer. And so my whole, that's what breast imagers do. We screen for breast cancer. We try to find, and women still die of breast cancer, lots of women, 40,000 a year die of breast cancer in the United States and many more worldwide. And overall, the rate of breast cancer death has fallen in our lifetimes because of improved detection and better therapies. It's a combination of both things. So I've been really focused on helping to improve detection of breast cancer. And so I've been, from the very beginning of digital mammography, I've been present, I was in the room when the NCI took a vote. We literally sat around a room. Who thinks we should develop digital mammography? And we raised our hands. So, as opposed to improving film mammography. So that was the vote, and we voted, and 5 years later, I was part of lots of research projects to help develop digital mammography.
NCI being the National Cancer Institute.
Right. And anyway, so I helped to develop, I did some of the basic research to help bring digital mammography to the market, and then the issue with digital, maybe now, because everybody knows it's better for some women, it seems obvious, but in its infancy, the spatial resolution, the ability to find small things, is less with digital mammography than it is with film mammography. The contrast resolution is better, meaning you can see differences in background. So those of you who are familiar with photography may already know all this, but many people don't know this. You assume digital has you can see smaller things, but in fact you can't see smaller things, you just see higher contrast things with digital. So the question was, would that hurt our ability to find breast cancer? So we actually really weren't sure if it would hurt our ability. We were worried that it might actually, and if you're finding breast cancer, when you come in for a screening mammogram, you have no symptoms, and if your test is negative, you come back in a year. So that's your chance to find it. So if you're missing it for a year, you might actually cost the woman her life. If that year makes a difference, if it progresses during that year. So it's really a big, important question. It's not just, okay, well, we'll wait a year, we'll find it. That really matters to wait that year. And so we did it, I was involved in all this, and so we decided that we needed to do a big study to prove that digital was actually better. So I ran this study called DMIST, and it was a lot of people involved. It was 50,000 women in 33 sites in the US and Canada. And we proved that digital was better for younger women with dense breasts. It's the same as for women with fatty breasts, but it was much better, significantly better. Many more cancers found, smaller cancers, more aggressive cancers.
And I think it was just a couple of years ago that a report came out basically saying women need not bother to get mammograms until after 50. And I found that you disagreed with that. So just Google her. You'll find amazing stuff. Will you talk a little bit about that? Because I think it is fairly controversial around a lot of us at different ages as to, who do we believe? They said don't do self-exam and only get mammograms after 50.
Well, I'll just say that this befuddles me. I'm so sick of this argument. We have done 7 randomized controlled trials, 7 trials, this is the gold standard of proof in medicine, okay? You can't do better testing of something than randomized trials. So there have been 7 of these that have shown, 6 of them have shown a reduction in mortality, 6 from screening mammography. And the reduction is present in women under 50. It's also present in women. It's much bigger reduction in deaths in women over 50, but it's not 0 in women under 50. I probably feel very passionately about this because I lost my mother to cancer in her 40s, and it's a big deal to lose a woman to cancer in your 40s. And so, yes, we don't save as many women in their 40s, but we save some of them. So anybody who tells you not to get screened, what they're doing is it's a cost-benefit ratio that they've calculated, and they've decided that there aren't enough women in their 40s to be saved with screening mammography. So
do you want to repeat that?
That just infuriates me. We save women in their 40s. The minimum we save is 18%, which is 1 out of 6. Okay, so that's the least number we save. All the studies have shown reduction in mortality. This is not like controversial, it's just how big a reduction there is.
How about self-exam? Why even
So there's
bother
less data to support self-exam in terms of reduction in mortality. Now, that doesn't mean that women shouldn't do it. It's cheap. Okay, you can teach women how to do it pretty easily, and it's an easy thing to do. And we do know that some women find their own cancers. So I tell women to do a self-exam. It doesn't do any harm,
Right,
essentially, as
right.
long as they're not neurotic about it and worrying about it a whole lot. I mean, if you feel something, you can go in and get it checked. I mean, what harm could that, to me, there's been no data to prove a reduction in mortality with a self-exam, though. And that's why people say,
Right.
don't do it. But I think that's
So in
silly.
all of her spare time at the University of North Carolina, Etta decided to take on the whole issue of diversity. You want to talk a little bit about that? Because this was fairly new.
Well, I've just, UNC, when I arrived in the dean's office, had 23 white males hired in a row into senior leadership positions. So, by senior leadership, I mean chairs of departments, center directors, and deans. So 23 in a row. There'd been a woman hired, and then 23 white men in a row. No men, nobody of color. And so I'm just a believer that organizations are better if they have diverse leadership. And there's huge data in the
It's
literature
all out
on this.
there.
There's no question that more diverse leadership leads to better decisions. Corporations that have diverse leadership have bigger margins. All the things that you don't have to be liberal or conservative. You can, the financial outcomes are better for more diverse leadership. So, and I came with this kind of belief. And so when I was put in the position of being in position of power and influence and could help to choose the leaders. I hired, while I was in the dean's office at UNC, I had 26 senior hires I made, and 13 of them were women and 1 African American, which was the first African American the organization had had in a leadership position in the College of Medicine. So I was pleased that we could do that. But frankly, it wasn't that hard. I mean, it was basically looking for the best person. We didn't make compromises. I wasn't the only one making the decision. It had to be a group decision. I was the vice dean for academic affairs, which at UNC meant I was over research and education, and I hired the chairs. I was the one hiring the chairs, but it was a big group organization. I didn't make the decisions all by myself. So I felt very good about that.
Well, you also tackled the issue of salaries.
Yeah, I did that too. I'm surprised how much you found out about me.
Didn't I tell you? You're out there, honey. You are out there. Talk a little bit about that, because, equal pay for equal work is still a huge issue. So how did you get the powers that be at UNC to agree to look at salaries based on gender and race?
So I have to tell an anecdote from early in my career first, and then I'll tell you how we did that. But when I was right out of my, shortly after I arrived, the salaries are public in Chapel Hill. So you can go look in a book and you can see what everybody makes, and you know how long they've been there, and every penny of what they make. And so I went to like my 3rd or 4th year there, and I looked up every person in my department, and I was shocked to see that every woman at every rank was paid between 15 and 20% less than every man at every rank. The same rank. Mm-hmm. And so I made a little table, a little chart with pink and blue columns in it. And I brought it to
Very subtle.
And I brought it to my chair, who was brand new. He had just taken the job, like a few months before. And the way I presented it to him, I showed him the table, and I said, these are the salaries, these are the average salaries for men and women in our department, but I can give you all the data. And he knew the data, of course, because he's the boss, so he was in charge of the salaries. He was setting the salaries, and of course he hadn't yet changed anything. And he was very graphically wrong the way it was. And he acted like he was embarrassed by it, and he told me he'd inherited it and that he was going to change it. And to his credit, he did. Within 2 or 3 years, all the salaries were evened out, which meant giving people raises, giving women raises and not giving men raises for a while. And I don't know what happened subsequently, but for a while it was okay. I was the chair of the Committee on the Status of Women years later, and constantly getting complaints from people. I know so-and-so makes that much, but the salary's openly available. Right. Everybody can go look for themselves. And so we convinced the university to adjust to do a logistic regression model. I also, and figure out who was underpaid and had made adjustments. And I also chaired a committee. We created a committee inside the College of Medicine. Before I became a dean, I was chairing a committee that had looked at all the salaries in the College of Medicine every year and made recommendations for adjustments. And we gave under 10 people a year, but we did the study and we evaluated salaries and we gave people raises every year. And they were men and women. There were people, both genders, who were underpaid.
I think one of the questions one would ask, too, in a situation like that is, how often did the women negotiate? That's always comes up, particularly when we start talking about when you go to your first job interview and you're negotiating for your salary, you need to negotiate for what is fair, okay, and what you deserve. And a lot of times, I know you attempt to negotiate, but you don't get it. It's like Lily Ledbetter. She didn't find out she was being discriminated against until she went to retire.
Right.
Let's bump forward to the Medical University of South Carolina. How'd they recruit you? I understand there were like 60 candidates for the position.
Yeah, well, there's always a search for such roles. The president asks faculty to serve on a search committee, and the search committee vets applicants, and they place an ad, and you throw your hat in if you think it might be an interesting job for you. And I had been looking to move up to be dean, and I wasn't moving to Detroit to be dean. I wasn't going to move to Montana. I wanted to look in the Southeast. I was living in Chapel Hill, and my husband and I had always thought, well, it would be nice if we could, this would be a place that we would consider. So when the job came open, he said, well, I think he probably thought I would never get the job. So I said, yeah, sure, go ahead, apply. And sure enough, I was offered the job.
Well, you followed him to Duke Medical School. He could follow you to the medical university, which I think goes back to your partnership.
Right, exactly.
You're in a very senior position at the medical university. And
True.
You also have tackled diversity at the medical university. I was there when you were given the first award for promoting diversity and increasing the status of women on campus. What kind of culture did you walk into when you came here?
Well, this is the oldest medical school in the South. Did you know that? Mm-hmm. It was founded well before the Civil War, in the 1820s, and it has very steeped in its traditions, and proud of its, as Charleston is proud of its traditions. And I think I've been told by a board member that. He's told me directly, so this is not like a big secret, that he came to interview me so that he could veto my candidacy because I was a woman. I mean, he told me that afterwards, after they selected me, which he said I won him over at the interview. So, but I mean, I think they really didn't want a woman dean. I think they thought a man would be better again. So obviously I convinced them at the interview I could do the job. But so it was, it was definitely... I don't think it's that different than other places, to be candid. I think that all institutions sort of have a bias toward the way things have always been. So women, in the whole United States, there are only about 12 women deans of medical schools, and women have been 50% of the med school classes for at least 25 years. So it seems like we should have a higher percentage if there weren't some sort of inherent tendency towards selection of. I think it's just any organization people in charge tend to pick people who remind them of themselves, and so I think that's I think it's just natural to the way organizations work. I mean,
well,
it's not good, but it's natural.
I have to make the comment. I did work at the medical university for about 2 years back in the late 70s. And the entire board of trustees of the medical university are older white men. And over 60-some% of the faculty, staff, and students are women. The medical university is the second largest employer in Charleston County. And you are it for within the medical management side, the academic management side for.
So we actually have 3 women deans
Okay,
now.
that's what
so
I wanted,
we have
okay.
the dean of the College of Nursing and the dean of the College of Health Professions are also women.
Okay.
And actually the executive vice president for finance and administration for the university is a woman. And she used to have the role also within the hospital, being the chief financial officer for the hospital. She's now given up that hat. She was wearing 2 hats. So she's now only have one hat. But, and then there are plenty of other, I mean, we have the CFO of the practice plan here tonight, and we have the Dean for Medical Education here tonight. So we have other senior women in the organization. But, yeah. I mean, it's mainly male still. I mean, there's no question. And the chairs, when I arrived, the chairs under me, you know, the chairs of the College of Medicine, there was really only one woman. So now we have more than that. I haven't counted recently. I think, well, we have 3, but we have Yuko too. So, yeah, 4. And then we have plenty of deans that I've appointed. I mean, Deborah wasn't in the dean's position, the dean of medical education position, so she's newly appointed there.
Congratulations.
She's an African American too, obviously.
You've been there for a while too. You've been over at the medical.
She was a medical student at MUSC. So,
what's next for you? I mean, I know you just came 3 years ago,
Yeah,
but when you think the long term, you know, the 10 years from now, you gonna still be here?
We love it here. I'd like to still be here. You know, these kinds of jobs depend on, you know, what the board and the president and the provost think of your performance. So they come with terms, and you can be reappointed or not. I'd like to be reappointed. I'd like to stay at the institution.
How long is your appointment?
I have a 5-year term.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm about halfway through.
You teach.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that. What are you seeing in the students today?
So as a dean, I don't get much opportunity to be in the classroom holding their hands and really dealing with everyday, you know, medical education issues. I mainly teach students in the lab now. So when students want to do research projects, they come and work in my lab and learn about how to do research. That's what I do primarily now. And that's pretty much what I've been doing for a long time. Other than when I was in the clinic, I was teaching students in that setting, you know, how to think about breast cancer, that sort of thing. The students are different than they were when I was a student. I mean, when we were students, there was a lot of, and I think it's a change for the better myself, although there are plenty of people in medicine who don't think it's a change for the better. The students, when I was a student, it was almost no matter what we were told we had to do, it was, they said jump, we said how high. You know, nowadays the students are more discerning, or more, they're more demanding of us to help them have a balanced life. I mean, you know, you've heard about the 80-hour work week. Believe it or not, we had to limit work to 80 hours because the students were complaining, the trainees were complaining they were working too hard. So it was not at all unusual when we were training to work, even in radiology, which is considered a lifestyle specialty and easy. I mean, I remember I got back from maternity leave after my first baby was born, and I worked a 120-hour week the first week back because I had to make up all the call I'd missed while I was on leave. So every other night on call for a week straight, my first week back, and it was long, long hours. You know, people work huge hours when we were students. Now we have limitations to that, and I think that's for the better. I think we do need to figure out how doctors can have more balanced lives. I think that's a good thing for our profession, but I know many, many people disagree with me on that. So the students are more demanding of that.
I think that is definitely the time. The times they are changing, and I think I'd like to ask you one last question that we can open it up. How do we improve that number of 12 female deans in the country when half of the medical students graduating are female? How do we change that culture? You've been in South Carolina long enough to know. Everybody here has heard me get on my soapbox and complain about the fact that we do not have diversity on our governing boards and commissions. And, you know, with state government, most of those governing boards and commissions are elected by the legislature, so it turns into a popularity contest and who you know. How can we, from this level, work on that particular issue? How do we change the culture?
I'm not sure you're talking about MUSC or broadly the whole country.
Both.
So I think just continuing to do good work and, you know, having people achieve, you know, so I'm going to brag about my people now. We just went through our accreditation site visit, and we did for the medical school, and we did better than the institution has ever done. And, you know, we were given superiors in a lot of areas, things that really we can be proud of, including our curriculum and our diversity and all sorts of really great things, the governance of the school, all sorts of stuff. And we were given hooray for us, you know, not only were we not slapped, but we were told how great it was. And we also, you know, we had we had one citation, which is like a record for, you know, almost never did they give so few citations. And what I think, the message, this happened under the leadership of a woman dean, and the top 4 people leading it were all women. So, I mean, I think that's the way things change, is that people see the results of good leadership. That maybe people need to be selected on their merits, not on their gender. And I think there are lots of women out there who are striving and trying to get those positions. And I think, just continuing to achieve and get good ends, for the organization will help MUSC change. I'll continue to work on diversity, but the organization as a whole will become less committed to doing things the old way or whatever once they see the results. In terms of the national picture, I think part of what needs to happen is women need to aspire for these positions. I mean, you just can't, one of the things that makes me nuts is when I ask women to do things, the only people who ever say, I'm not ready for that job are women. I mean, honest to God, I've never had a man say that one time to me. Never. Men are always ready for the position, but
even if they're not.
They think they are, but women are more worried about being ready. And so I'd say we need to get girls to be confident and ready when, so like, just going back to my own story, the story when the guy came around and said, you will do this, I never thought I couldn't do it. And I think it's important for women to believe in themselves. I mean, I wasn't sure I wanted to do it, but I didn't think I couldn't do it, and that I've had women who I've offered jobs to who've said, oh, I'm just not ready for this, I'm just, what about this skill, what about that skill? You just have to have, somehow we need to instill confidence in young women that they should step up and take the opportunities they get. Saying no early in your career is a big mistake, in my opinion, because people only offer you, if you say no, you say, I'm just not ready, or it's just not the right time, they're going to remember that, and you may not get asked again. So,
very good advice.